Every December, the safety bonus form went out to 400 drivers. You signed it, you mailed it back, and about 3 weeks later a check for $2,400 showed up. It was the simplest thing that company did all year. 400 drivers signed it. One man didn't. For 21 years. They wrote uncooperative in his personnel file. They wrote, does not participate in company programs. A supervisor noted in 2009 that he declined the annual incentive for personal reasons and would not elaborate. And every single one of those 21 years, he sent that form back with the signature line blank and one sentence written in the margin. And Cordray Freight Systems filed all 21 of them in a box in a basement without one person ever reading what it said. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one, because the last 5 minutes are about the man whose name is in that sentence. He's still alive, and he had no idea. Let me start with the basement. Nora Fisk was 26 years old, and she had a 4-month contract. Cordray Freight Systems ran about 400 trucks out of 3 terminals in the upper Midwest, and like a lot of companies that age, they had a records problem, 30 years of paper in bankers' boxes in a basement room under the main office, and an insurance carrier that had recently started asking pointed questions about retention and retrieval. So they hired a temporary compliance clerk to scan it. All of it. That was the job. Open a box, feed paper into a document scanner, name the file, close the box, next box. Nobody wanted that job. It was dusty and it was tedious and it ended in June. And I want to be clear about Nora Fisk's position, because it matters at the end of this story. She was not staff. She had no benefits, no protection, and no standing. She was a contractor with an end date, in a company where she did not know a single person's last name, doing the least important job in the building. She started in the 1990s boxes and worked forward. By the end of her 3rd week, she was in 2011. Here's what the form looked like, and this is the whole story, so stay with me for about 90 seconds. The Cordray Annual Safety Incentive was 1 page. It had the company logo at the top. It had blanks for the driver's name, employee number, terminal, and the calendar year. At the bottom there was a signature line, a date line, and a note that the incentive would be processed within 21 business days. And between the top and the bottom, in a paragraph of 8-point type that ran the full width of the page, there was a certification clause. It said, and I'm summarizing, but not by much, that by signing, the driver certified that over the preceding 12 months he had complied with all applicable hours of service regulations, had operated in accordance with all company safety policies, and had reported all accidents, incidents, and equipment defects as required. Read that again and think about what it actually is. That is not an award. That is a sworn statement. Every December, 400 drivers signed a legal document certifying that their entire preceding year had been fully compliant. And they signed it in about 4 seconds, standing at a dispatch counter, because there was a check attached to it. And here is what that document is for, in the only moment it ever actually gets used. If a driver at that company is ever in a serious accident, if there's litigation, if there's a question about fatigue or hours or a maintenance defect, then the company's attorneys go and get that driver's signed form from the previous December. And they put it on the table. And they say, this man certified in writing that he was in full compliance. It doesn't matter what dispatch told him to do. It doesn't matter what the schedule was. He signed a piece of paper saying everything was fine, and now he's saying it wasn't. $2,400. If you have ever signed something at work without reading it, and everybody watching this has, then this story is about that. Subscribe if you believe the most dangerous piece of paper in a building is usually the one everybody signs without looking. And tell me down in the comments. When was the last time you signed something you hadn't read? I read every single one. Nora found the first one on a Tuesday afternoon in the 2011 box. She was going fast by then. Grab, straighten, feed, name, next. And a page came through the scanner where the signature line was empty. She pulled it back out. Cordray Annual Safety Incentive, 2011. Driver name filled in, employee number filled in, terminal filled in. Signature line blank. And in the right-hand margin, in blue ballpoint in a careful blocky hand, 1 sentence. She read it. She didn't understand it. It didn't mean anything to her. It was a name and a phrase, and she had 11 boxes to get through that week. So she put it in the scan pile and kept going. 2 days later, she was in the 2012 box. Same form. Same name. Signature line blank. Same sentence in the same handwriting in the same margin. She sat back in her chair for a second, and then she went and got the 2013 box and then 2014, and she found it in both of them. And that's when Nora Fisk stopped going forward and started going backward. She found 21 of them. 2004 through 2024. Every single December for 21 years, that man had received a form, declined to sign it, written the same sentence in the margin, and mailed it back. And Cordray Freight Systems had filed every one. The name on the forms was Lonnie Bratcher. He was 71 years old by the time Nora Fisk found the boxes. Retired 3 years, 34 years at Cordray. His personnel file was thin the way a long careers file usually is, a lot of nothing, which is what a good record looks like. No preventable accidents. No violations. 2 commendations from customers, both from the 90s. And then, threaded through the last 21 years of it, a running commentary. Declines annual incentive. Uncooperative. Does not participate in company programs. Attitude issue, declines to explain. Spoke with driver incentive form. Driver polite but will not elaborate. Recommend no further action. That last one was from 2009, and it's the closest anybody at that company ever came to asking. Around the yard, he was just the guy who wouldn't take the bonus. Some men thought it was a protest about something and couldn't tell you what. Some thought he was religious about something. A couple thought he was proud or strange or had some tax thing going on. Nobody ever asked him what the sentence said. And this is the part that Nora Fisk has never gotten over, and neither have I. They were not hidden. He didn't seal them in an envelope or hand them to somebody privately. He wrote it in the margin in clear block capitals on the front of the page and put it in the company mail. 21 times. They were read by nobody because nobody reads a returned form. They looked at the signature line, saw it was blank, marked him as declining, and put the paper in a box. The information was in the building the entire time. It was just in the wrong kind of container, a box instead of a conversation. Now let me tell you what it cost him. The bonus started at $2,400 in 2004 and it went up over the years. By 2024 it was $3,100. Nora added it up because she is the kind of person who adds things up. $56,400. And Lonnie Bratcher was not an owner-operator. He was a company driver. He had a mortgage on a small house, a wife who worked at a county clerk's office, and 2 kids. So let me put $56,000 in the context of that house. In 2007 the roof went and they did half of it, the half over the bedrooms, and lived with the rest for 4 more years. In 2013 their daughter got into a university about 3 hours away and went to a community college for 2 years instead, and then transferred. She has said since, as an adult and gently, that she never resented it, and she also knew exactly what December was in that house. In 2016 Charlene Bratcher had a dental thing that got put off for a year and a half. Nobody starved. That's not the story. This was a family that was fine. They were just fine slightly harder than they had to be, every single year, for 21 years, over a piece of paper that took 4 seconds to sign. Let me tell you about Charlene, because I think she's the most quietly remarkable person in this. Charlene Bratcher was married to him for 44 years, and she knew about the forms from the beginning. Not the reason. The forms. In December of 2004, the first year, he told her he wasn't going to take it. She asked why. And he said, "Because I'm not going to sign the thing they're asking me to sign." And she said what anybody would say, which was, "What does that mean?" And Lonnie Bratcher said, "I'd rather not get into it." Now, here's what she did. And it's the thing about that marriage that I keep turning over. She asked twice more. Once in 2007, the year of the roof. Once in 2013, the year their daughter didn't go where she wanted to go. Both times, he gave her the same answer. Not angrily. He just wouldn't get into it. And after 2013, Charlene Bratcher stopped asking, and she never brought it up again for 11 more years. She told Nora later exactly why, and what she said was this: "In 44 years, that man never once lied to me. Not about money, not about anything. So when he said he wouldn't sign it, I believed there was a reason, and I believed if he could tell me he would." She said, "I didn't need to know the reason. I needed to know there was one." And she said, And this is the part that got me. I'll admit I was angry about the roof. There's a detail in those 21 forms that Nora noticed about a week in, and it stayed with her more than the money did. The sentence never changes. Not one word across 21 years. Same phrasing, same block capitals, same blue ballpoint. But the handwriting changes. In 2004 it's firm and even a man in his 50s writing quickly. By about 2018 you can see it starting to go. The letters a little larger, a little rounder, the pressure uneven. The 2024 one, the last one, is noticeably shaky. He was 70 by then. Same 11 words. 21 times. In a hand that got older. Now I have to tell you about 2003. Marlon Rule was 38 years old and he had been at Cordray for 9 years. And Lonnie Bratcher had trained him on flatbed in 1994. They were close. Not best friends close, trucking doesn't really allow that. But the kind of close where you know the man's kids' names and you cover his run when his mother's sick. In the fall of 2003, Marlon Rule had a bad week. Dispatch gave him 2 schedules in 5 days that could not be run legally. Not tight. Not aggressive. Arithmetically impossible inside the hours available. He said so. Both times. And both times he got a version of the same answer, which is the answer drivers have been getting for 50 years. Everybody else makes it work. On the second one, he had been awake about 17 hours when he came up on stop traffic. He went into the back of a passenger vehicle at highway speed. Nobody was killed. I want to say that immediately. 2 people in that car were hurt, one seriously, a broken pelvis, and both of them recovered. But it was a serious accident with serious injuries and there was litigation, and Cordray Freight Systems insurers put lawyers in a room. And Lonnie Bratcher was in that room because he was a witness. He had been on the same lanes that week and he had heard Marlon's side of both dispatch conversations on the radio. He went in there to help his friend. And what he watched happen is the reason all of this exists. Cordray's attorney put a piece of paper on the table. Marlon Rule's signed safety incentive form. December 2002. His own handwriting on the signature line. And they went through that certification clause line by line. This driver certified full compliance with hours of service regulations. This driver certified he reported all incidents. This driver signed this 11 months ago and accepted $2,400 for it. Everything Marlon Rule said about dispatch, about the schedules, about telling them twice. All of it came apart against one page he'd signed at a counter without reading. The company's exposure went from enormous to manageable in about 4 minutes. Marlon Rule lost his CDL. He lost the house 18 months later. His marriage ended in 2006. He never drove commercially again. And Lonnie Bratcher sat in that room and watched a piece of paper do that. 14 months later, in December of 2004, his own form arrived in his box at the terminal. He read the certification clause, probably for the first time in 9 years of signing them. And he left the signature line blank, and he wrote in the margin, "I won't sign what they used on Marlon Rule." And he put it in the company mail. Now let me answer the question you've been sitting on for 10 minutes, which is the same one Nora Fisk had. Why didn't he tell anybody? He worked alongside 400 drivers for 21 more years. He could have stood up at a safety meeting. He could have said one sentence at a fuel island. He could have told 20 guys in an afternoon. He never did. Not once. And when Nora finally asked him, sitting at his kitchen table in 2026, the answer he gave her took about 40 seconds, and it is the best answer anybody's given me for anything in a long time. He said, "What was I going to tell them?" He said, "Don't take that money, because someday they'll use that paper against you." He said, "Nobody believes that until it's them. And I know that for a fact, because I signed 9 of them myself and I never read one." And then he said the part that Nora wrote down in her car afterward. "That's $2,400 in December. That's Christmas. That's the transmission. That's the kids' braces. I'm going to stand in a fuel island and tell a man not to take that, on account of a thing that probably won't ever happen to him." He said, he'd take it anyway. He should take it anyway. And then he'd feel bad about it. That's all I'd be doing. Making a man feel bad about the only $2,400 anybody was going to hand him all year. So he made himself the only man who refused, and he never explained it, and he let them write uncooperative in his file for 21 years. because the alternative was making 400 men feel guilty about Christmas money. Now here's why any of this came out at all. In the spring of 2026, the same spring Nora Fisk was working through those boxes, Cordray Freight Systems was in the early stages of a claim involving a driver named Amos Deal. Amos Deal was 33. He'd had an accident in January, and the shape of it was familiar enough that a person could get cold reading the file. Impossible schedule. He'd said so to dispatch in writing on the messaging system. He'd been told to make it work. Nobody died. His injuries were the worst ones in it, and there was a second vehicle with a driver who was shaken up and not much more. And by March, Cordray's attorneys were doing exactly what Cordray's attorneys had done in 2003. They had Amos Deal's December 2025 safety incentive form. Signed, dated, his own name in his own hand. His attorney, a young lawyer at a small firm, had almost nothing to work with, because the paper trail said his client had certified full compliance 11 months before the accident. And in a basement 2 floors down, a 26-year-old contract scanner had 21 pieces of paper on the table in front of her. All in the same handwriting, all dated December, all saying the same 11 words. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not going to overstate what those forms did. 21 unsigned bonus forms did not win Amos Deal's case. That's not how any of this works. What they did was much narrower and much harder to argue with. They established notice. Cordray Freight Systems could not say that nobody had ever raised a concern about the certification clause, or that it had never occurred to anyone that it might be used the way it was being used. Because a driver had told them, in writing, in their own internal mail, every single December for 21 consecutive years, and they had filed every one of those objections in a box in their own basement. A company can defend a policy nobody complained about. It's a different conversation when the complaint is in their own filing cabinet 21 times, in the same handwriting. The deal matter settled. The terms are confidential, which I'd expect. Amos Deal kept his CDL and he's driving today, for somebody else. And Cordray Freight Systems rewrote the form. The 2026 annual safety incentive is 1 page with a name, an employee number, a terminal, a year, and a signature line. There's no certification clause on it. That paragraph is gone, and it will not be coming back. And there are 400 drivers at that company who have no idea it was ever there or that it ever left. Now let me tell you what Nora Fisk actually risked, because I don't want to skip past it. She was a contractor with 11 weeks left. She did not work for that company. She had no protection of any kind, no HR standing, no union, no seniority, nothing. What she was holding was 21 documents that were mildly catastrophic for her client, in the middle of an active claim. She thought about it for 4 days. She has been honest about that. She says she thought about zipping the box, finishing her contract, and going home in June. What she did instead was scan all 21 of them, flag them in the system under the retention exception category, and email her direct supervisor a 2-line summary with the files attached. She says she made it as boring as she possibly could. She says that was deliberate. Her contract was not renewed in June. She told me she didn't expect it to be, and that she doesn't think it was retaliation exactly. A 4-month contract ends when it ends. She works somewhere else now in a similar job, and she says she's fine, and I believe her. She drove out to see Lonnie Bratcher in May, before her contract ended. Small house on a county road, the roof finally all one color. 71 years old, retired 3 years, Charlene in the kitchen. Nora put the 21 forms on his table, and she told him what they'd been used for and what they'd done and what Cordray had changed. And Lonnie Bratcher looked at those pages for a while, and the first thing he asked her was not about the case or the company or the form or the $56,000. He asked, "Is Marlon all right?" And Nora Fisk had to tell him she didn't know, because it had genuinely not occurred to her, in 3 months of handling that man's name in blue ballpoint, that Marlon Rule might still be alive. He is. Marlon Rule is 61 years old. He lives about 400 miles from that terminal. He has worked at a parts counter since 2008, and he has been remarried since 2011, and he is, by every account, doing fine. He and Lonnie Bratcher had not spoken since 2005. Not because of a falling out. Because Marlon was ashamed, and Lonnie didn't know what to say, and 1 year became 5 and 5 became 20, the way it does. He had absolutely no idea about the forms. 21 Decembers. 21 times a man wrote his name on a corporate document and mailed it into a filing system. $56,000 of a company driver's money, over a man he hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. Nora Fisk found him and called him and told him. She says that was the hardest phone call she's ever made, and also the only part of any of this she'd do again without thinking about it. They talk now. Not constantly, 2 men in their 60s and 70s, so a few times a year and awkwardly. But Marlon Rule drove up there in the autumn and sat at that kitchen table, and Charlene Bratcher made lunch, and according to her, neither of them said one single word about 2003 the entire afternoon. They talked about trucks. For 4 hours. Cordray Freight Systems looked at 21 returned forms and saw an uncooperative employee who declined to participate in company programs. Lonnie Bratcher looked at that same piece of paper and saw the exact document he had watched come out of a briefcase and end a man's life in a room in 2003. Some men refuse to sign something because they're stubborn. And some men refuse because they sat in a room once and watched what that particular piece of paper does, and then wrote the man's name in the margin every December for 21 years, at $2,400 a time, and told absolutely nobody. He's alive, Lonnie. He's all right, and he knows now.